Vox Voice Works, an experience in sound.
Vox Voice Works presents an original audio production, The Throneless Crown.
Once upon a time, lands were prosperous. The people lived with the certainty of a bright future ahead. Their homes unmarked by the dark shadows that now creep across the earth. From the towering cliffs of Enocan's coast to the fertile plains of Lanston, peace reigned. It was a time of feast and celebration, where every noble house played its part in ensuring the security of the realm. But that was before the coming of the Cult of the Dragon, before their wings blotted out the sky, before the heralds arrived in the dead of night. The barony of Lanston was one such place, untouched by the chaos that had now spread like a disease. Its people live without fear, for the father of the current Baron, bold and proud, unbending, had held his walls and had made them strong enough to deflect any threat. But that was then, and this is now. Doom approaches, and its herald tells of times to come that are much more grim than now. The herald comes, bringing the decree of the Crimson One, who leads this sect of the cult, who will carve their doom in fire and blood.
The heavy oak doors of Baron Charles's grand hall slammed open, the sound echoing off the stone walls, drowning out the murmurs of courtiers seated around the table. The room fell into stunned silence, all eyes turning towards the imposing figure that entered. He was tall, taller than any man had the right to be, and garbed in dark robes embroidered with the unmistakable symbol of the Cult of the Dragon. His face obscured by a mask that held silent power of one who needed no introduction. His presence alone was enough to send a chill through the room. Baron Charles, who had been at the head of the table, stiffened, but did not rise. His hands clasped behind his back tightened their grip as his jaw clenched. He could feel the weight of the envoy's gaze, though he could not see his eyes. The herald moved forward with purpose, his cloak trailing behind him with a dark shadow. His footsteps seemed to vibrate through the stone, a reminder of the menace that walked through the halls of the proud Baron.
Baron Charles, the herald spoke. The Crimson One has sent me to deliver his message. You will surrender what is rightfully his.
The Baron scoffed, his lips curling into a sneer. I have nothing that belongs to your cult, envoy. If your master seeks anything from me, he will be sorely disappointed. The herald's hand shifted beneath his cloak, and when they emerged, they held a blood-stained piece of parchment. The blood was fresh, still glistening under the torchlight.
You may wish to reconsider, Baron,
the herald said softly, pressing the parchment onto the table before Charles. The symbol of the Crimson One was burned into the paper, unmistakable. Baron Charles reached forward, his expression hardening as he grasped the parchment. His fingers twitched as he read, eyes flicking from the words to the herald's face. The air in the hall seemed to thicken as the reality of the situation set in. The Baron's defiance faltered, but only for a moment. "You think you can intimidate me?" Baron Charles muttered, his voice low but full of fury. "I will not bow to your master." The herald's response was cold, his posture unwavering.
"It is not you who will bow, Baron. It is the land you call home. It will be broken and burned. And then you will bow when the Crimson One arrives."
With that, the herald turned, his long black robe sweeping the floor as he moved towards the exit, his final words echoing in the grand hall like the tolling of a death bell.
"The cult of the dragon will not be denied."
His last words as he stepped out. As the door slammed shut behind him, the room was left in stunned silence, the weight of the message hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Baron Charles stood frozen. For a long moment his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed the parchment aside, his face red with anger.
"They think they can threaten me,"
he muttered, pacing.
"The land is mine. I will not surrender it to some cultist in their fervent worship of that demon."
But even as he spoke, the Baron could feel the truth creeping into his mind. The Crimson One was not a force that could be easily ignored. The heavy thud of the Baron's goblet hitting the table rang through the grand hall, silencing what little murmurs remained after the envoy's departure. Baron Charles's face was set in a hard sneer, his fingers tapping against the rim of his cup as if contemplating his next move. He did not have to think long.
"They think they can threaten me,"
he muttered, before standing, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. His eyes swept across the gathered knights and retainers who had been present for the envoy's intrusion.
"I will not be cowed like some frightened serf. The cult of the dragon believes they can slink into my lands, whisper their threats, and walk away unscathed."
His voice rose with every word, his fury igniting like a spark on dry tinder. He turned to the captain of his guards, a grizzled man, clad in the red and gold of Lanston.
"I want them rooted out,"
the Baron ordered, his voice cold.
"Any member of their wretched cult found in my town is to be executed at once. No trial, no mercy. Drag them through the streets and let the people see the fate of those who dare bring their poison here."
His knights exchanged uneasy glances, but did not question him. They knew better. Baron Charles was a man of conviction, whether it led to victory or ruin.
"And send the bodies of the cult dogs waiting outside my walls." His sneer deepened. "Let them see how little I fear them."
The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words. What happened next was swift, near clinical in its approach. The guards and knights did as they were bidden. They fanned out throughout the city and found any cultist they could, dragging them through the streets, and all who were found were put to the sword. Their bodies rounded up, thrown into carts, and brought outside the city walls. There they were delivered to the cultist, and they summoned the herald forth. He looked upon the bodies. He had little to say to them. He looked over the bodies once more, before issuing them a warning.
This will be the end of you. You know that, right? You have chosen a path that you can't walk back. Foolish, but what is done is done.
The Baron's seneschal was quick to retort.
Yeah, you say whatever you want to say. It isn't going to change anything. Now take you and your heathen dogs away from our lands. Baron's orders.
And with that the herald left. He departed, taking a small contingent of his men and walking towards the mountains, where he would seek an audience with his master. Deep within the heart of the cult's encampment, beyond the crude banners bearing the sigil of the Red Dragon, a massive hoard of gold and stolen riches lay undisturbed. Among the mountains of treasure, a single great form stirred. The Crimson One uncoiled from his bed of coin, crimson scales glinting with a fire of their own, as he stretched his immense wings. The chamber shook with his movement, a low growl reverberating through the cavern as his slitted eyes snapped open. Before him his herald knelt. The robed figure breathed quick and shallow beneath the dragon's gaze. The great worm loomed above him, massive claws raking through the gold, sending a cascade of coins spilling across the cavern floor. The herald did not flinch.
Speak, slave.
The herald kept his head bowed.
The Baron has sent your envoys back to us, my lord. And he has sent them back in pieces.
The herald swallowed. The chamber trembled, the flames of the flickering brazier wildly dancing about, the very air itself thickening with heat. The dragon's crimson scales darkened at the edges, burning with the inner fire of their own. His claws clenched, crushing a handful of coins to molten slag.
Arrogant little fool!
The Crimson One's wings flared wide, his great tail lashing against the cavern wall, sending debris clashing to the floor. His pupils burned like embers as he turned his full wrath towards his herald.
He thinks himself above me. He seeks to insult me.
The herald bowed lower.
Shall we prepare the forces, my lord? Yes. Ready them all. We shall turn his little hamlet into ash. Everything and everyone that he thinks he owns will be mine.